Friends, if you want to watch the super hit animated fantasy film Ne Zha in English, then you must like this video. If you are visiting our channel for the first time, don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Friends, in today's video, the movie we are going to talk about is called Ne Zha, a film that took the world of animation by storm. We will talk about what this movie is all about, where you can watch it, and all the amazing and interesting facts surrounding it. In today's video, I am going to tell you everything about Ne Zha, including on which OTT platform or television channel you can enjoy this magical adventure. We will also dive into details about its technical brilliance, the animation team, pre-production, post-production, music, budget, and box office performance which surprised everyone by breaking multiple records. Along with this, we will explore the storyline of this film, discuss the background of the characters, and I will share with you a short review of the story that combines fantasy, humor, and emotional depth. Apart from this, we will take a close look at the cast of voice actors, their performances, and which actor has brought life to which character. That's why I request you friends to watch this video till the end, because you are going to enjoy every detail about this blockbuster animated masterpiece. So, let's start the video. From the very first beat, Ne Zha slams you into a myth. A primordial chaos pearl is split by the heavenly court into a spirit pearl and a demon orb, and that cosmic split propels everything that comes after. Destiny, deception, and disaster all get their marching orders from that single moment. The film then mostly marches forward in a clear, almost fable-like line rather than messing with time. Tai is charged to reincarnate the spirit pearl as a human child, but Shen Gongbao's jealousy, and a crucial switch, means the demon orb ends up reborn in Li Jing's house as Ne Zha, so the movie is set up as a ticking fate bomb, a child born under a curse, loved by parents who try to protect him with white lies, trained by a stern master, and constantly at odds with the world that has already labeled him monster. The middle of the story works like a pressure cooker of misunderstandings and impulsive heroics. Ne Zha's attempts to prove himself, chasing demons, rescuing a girl, and accidentally setting a village on fire, flip public opinion into outright hatred, and those public beats are what transform personal conflict into community-wide tragedy. At the same time, the film smartly complicates morality by giving Ne Zha a true friend in Ao Bing, who was born from the spirit pearl and raised with dragon expectations. That friendship becomes the emotional hinge, because the boy who is supposed to be noble and the boy branded a demon find themselves forced into choices that test loyalty, identity, and duty. The big turning points land like set pieces. Shen's dramatic reveal at a birthday party that shatters Ne Zha's trust, Ne Zha's violent transformation and exile, Li Jing's heartbreaking bargain to trade his own life for his son, and the final, operatic climax where Ne Zha and Ao Bing link hands to absorb the approaching heavenly lightning. Their bodies are destroyed but their spirits survive, turning what could have been a simple tragedy into a strange, bittersweet transcendence. Narratively, it's classical more than experimental. No tricky non-linearity, but the movie uses mythic framing, strong emotional callbacks, and even a mid-credit tease to make the world feel larger than the single tale, and thematically it keeps hammering on free will versus fate, the cruelty of labels, and the lengths parents will go for their children, all delivered with kinetic action, big comic set pieces, and surprising tenderness so that each plot beat hits both the eye and the heart. The characters in Ne Zha are what turn a myth into something messy, warm, and very human. None of them are flat symbols trotted out to hit plot beats. They arrive with quirks, grudges, and surprising softness that the story keeps teasing apart. Ne Zha himself is the movie's heart and its delicious contradiction, loud, impulsive, and gleefully destructive on the surface, but underneath all the one-liners and tantrums is a kid who is terrified of being irredeemable. That mix of cocky humor and bruised insecurity makes every reckless act feel like both bravado and a cry for acceptance. So his move from angry outcast to someone willing to shoulder the worst for others lands as earned rather than melodramatic. Ao Bing is the perfect mirror, outwardly controlled and honed by duty, inwardly lonely and curious, and his slow unraveling of assumptions about honor and hostility, largely because of his friendship with Ne Zha, gives the film its most bittersweet beats. His choices show how allegiance can become conscience when you meet a person instead of a label. The adults are textured too. The father's pride and fear don't read as simple cruelty but as shame and social pressure twisting love into something tragic, and the mentor figure balances affection and rigid tradition in a way that raises questions about whether guidance can become control. Even the antagonist's side is shaded. Envy and ambition drive manipulative moves that feel human rather than cartoon evil, which makes every betrayal sting more because you can almost see the resentments that produced it. Secondary characters and the romantic thread aren't accessories. They reflect, provoke, and sometimes soften the leads, giving Ne Zha moments where he must choose between selfish survival and messy loyalty. The performances and the animation collaborate here. Tiny gestures, a lingering glance, a comedic tick that turns into a crack of sadness. All of it layers the characters so the film's big set pieces hit emotionally as well as viscerally. In short, Growth in Ne Zha isn't just about a hero learning to fight better. It's about people discovering who they are when the labels fall away, and the way relationships, friendship, parental love, rivalry, mentorship, push and pull those discoveries gives the whole story its wrenching, joyful shape. Performances in Ne Zha are the secret spice that turn an animated spectacle into something deeply relatable and emotionally charged. Voice acting in this film isn't just about delivering lines. It's about infusing animated figures with a pulse, with sarcasm, with heartbreak, with a kind of personality that makes you forget you're watching pixels on a screen. Ne Zha's voice actor nails that balance of bratty humor and raw vulnerability. Every shout, every sneer, every moment of defiance has just enough crack in it to remind you this is still a child, scared of the world branding him a monster. The comedy hits because of the quick timing and mischievous tone, but the tragedy lands because that same voice can suddenly break with exhaustion or self-doubt. Ao Bing's performance, by contrast, is calm, measured, almost regal at first, but the strength of the actor is in the subtle unraveling. You can hear the weight of his duty, the way his words are wrapped in hesitation when he begins to care for Ne Zha, and in the final act that composure shifts into raw emotion. It's a voice that mirrors his icy exterior cracking open to reveal warmth, and the contrast with Ne Zha's fiery delivery gives their scenes together the texture of real friendship and conflict. Even the supporting cast refuses to fade into the background. Li Jing and Lady Yin, Ne Zha's parents, are portrayed with tenderness and aching restraint. You hear a father's frustration, not as anger for its own sake, but as fear disguised as sternness. You hear a mother's unwavering softness, her voice carrying the quiet desperation of someone who knows she cannot protect her son forever. These performances deepen the family dynamic, making their sacrifices hit much harder than if the characters had been painted in broad strokes. Tai's voice work is another standout, injecting levity and eccentric charm that break tension without ever derailing the story. His exaggerated tones, comedic rhythm, and bursts of seriousness make him more than just comic relief. He becomes a grounding figure whose unpredictability keeps both Ne Zha and the audience on their toes. Even the antagonist's side, particularly Shen Gongbao, is performed with enough venom and calculated cadence that you feel his bitterness rather than just hearing it. His words drip with the satisfaction of manipulation, giving every scheme a sharp edge that feels personal. What makes the entire voice cast remarkable is how harmonized their performances are. Every actor leans into the emotional heartbeat of their character, but none overshadow the others. Together, they elevate the story from myth to something lived in, something you can feel. The emotional depth of the film doesn't just come from the writing or the animation, it comes from the voices breathing humanity into gods, demons, and mortals alike. The director of Ne Zha steers the movie like a conductor who's equally at home with thunderous orchestral swells and a punk rock drumbeat, sculpting a tone that flickers between mythic grandeur and mischievous teen energy so the film never feels either dusty or twee. From the opening cosmic setup to the last bolt of lightning, the director chooses momentum over languor. Action scenes are staged with cinematic bravado, broad, swooping camera moves, bold silhouettes, and choreography that reads like a dance, while emotional scenes tighten into intimate close-ups where a small gesture or a trembling glance says more than a speech. Stylistically, the film loves contrast. Ancient legends are colored with modern swagger, classical iconography sits alongside pop-inflected humor, and the visuals swap from painterly landscapes to hyperkinetic set pieces in a way that keeps the eye excited and the heart tuned. Pacing is a careful game of give and take. The director lets the film run fast enough to thrill, rapid cuts, escalating stakes, comic beats that land with surgical timing, but also knows when to breathe, a quiet family scene, a moment of shame or tenderness, that lets the next eruption hit harder. Shot composition often plays with scale and perspective to underline theme. Tiny Ne Zha against vast skies, cramped village streets that feel claustrophobic when public hatred closes in, and epic aerial vistas that make the final sacrifice feel both personal and universal. The director also uses recurring visual and auditory motifs, fire and lightning, circular imagery, a musical refrain, to stitch the narrative beats together so that set pieces aren't just spectacle but story. Humor isn't tacked on, it's woven into performance and staging so that a gag can pivot immediately into heartbreak, which keeps the emotional temperature unpredictable and effective. Above all, the director's vision treats myth as living material, not museum glass. Gods and monsters are animated with human impulses, and the film's stylistic risks, mixing genres, textures, and tonal registers, pay off because every choice serves character and theme rather than decoration. Cinematography in Ne Zha works like a magician's trick, constantly shifting your perspective so that every beat of the story feels heightened, whether it's a furious battle in the sky or a quiet moment of doubt in a child's room. Camera angles are used almost like punctuation marks. When Ne Zha storms into action, the camera swoops, dives, and spins with him, pulling the viewer into the chaos so you feel the speed, the danger, the heat of his fire swirling across the frame. But when he's vulnerable or weighed down by destiny, the framing pulls back, dwarfing him against massive walls, endless skies, or the looming bodies of adults, a visual reminder of how small and fragile he still is beneath all the noise. Lighting is equally deliberate and tells its own story. Fire and lightning aren't just special effects, they're mood shifters. Ne Zha's flames glow hot, reckless, and wild, painting his scenes with a fierce, volatile energy, while Ao Bing's icy power is lit in cooler, crystalline tones that calm the eye but also hint at the suffocating restraint he lives under. Together, their contrasting palettes create a visual duel of heat and cold, rebellion and duty, chaos and order. In more tender moments, the lighting softens, filling rooms with golden warmth that speaks of parental love, or dipping into deep blues and shadows to underline loneliness and fear. Framing choices consistently underline the themes. Crowds are often shown as looming masses around Ne Zha, shot from angles that make him appear cornered and judged, amplifying the social suffocation he feels. By contrast, wide open skies dominate scenes where destiny looms larger than any one person, setting up the grandeur of the myth. One of the most striking visual choices comes during the final confrontation, when the storm above consumes the entire frame, and Ne Zha and Ao Bing are shown as tiny figures against a wall of lightning. It's spectacle, yes, but it's also metaphor, two children standing small yet unbroken against the machinery of heaven. The film's cinematography thrives on tension between intimacy and epic scale. Close-ups let us catch the flicker of doubt in Ne Zha's eyes, the moment his bravado cracks, while sweeping crane shots and dizzying aerial spins drop us into the operatic scale of gods and demons at war. The visual rhythm creates an atmosphere that is constantly alive, constantly balancing beauty with threat, comedy with dread. Ne Zha doesn't just tell you its story. Through angles, light, and framing, it makes you feel it in your bones. The film's editing acts like a heartbeat that decides when the story sprints and when it inhales. Action scenes are stitched with punchy, rapid cuts so every flip, blast, and clash feels immediate and physical, often landing on musical or sound design hits so the chaos reads as choreography rather than noise. Comedy and small interpersonal beats lean on tiny holds and reaction cuts. The editor will freeze a face for the sliver of a second that turns a line into a laugh, then snap away before the joke overstays its welcome. By contrast, family and emotional scenes are given room to breathe with longer takes, gentle dissolves, and close-ups that let a single look or tremor register. Those slower rhythms turn big spectacle into something the audience can actually feel. Montage is used smartly to compress training and social escalation, so years of reputation building pass without clumsy exposition, while parallel cutting between Ne Zha's alienation and Ao Bing's dutiful life heightens tension as their arcs march toward collision. Transitions aren't shy, the editors favor match cuts and occasional smash cuts to link motifs, fire to lightning, child to legend, which keeps the film thematically tight and visually satisfying. There are moments where the middle act repeats public shaming beats enough that the tempo feels slightly circular, and occasionally the emotional fallout after a huge set piece is wrapped up a bit quickly, making some reckonings feel a touch compressed rather than fully savored. Those are small stumbles amid otherwise nimble rhythm. When the story needs to roar, the cuts propel you, and when it needs to ache, the frame is allowed to hold and hurt. You can feel the editing shaping surprise, suspense, and tenderness in almost equal measure, turning pacing into one of the film's primary storytelling instruments. The soundtrack and score in Ne Zha act like a secret narrator, slipping between swagger and sorrow so the film's mood can flip on a dime. One moment you're riding a thundering percussion-driven rush that makes every fight feel like a tribal ritual, the next you're inside a tiny, aching string phrase that sits on a character's chest and won't let go. Rather than sitting politely in the background, the music participates. Leitmotifs quietly tag characters and ideas, a restless, jagged figure for Ne Zha's defiance, a flowing, contained phrase for Ao Bing's duty. So emotional changes register instantly even when the dialogue is sparse. The orchestration mixes broad, cinematic gestures with intimate textures. Big brass and drums power the showy battles and public hysteria, while solo strings, a lone piano, or a muted woodwind carry the private grief and small reconciliations. Traditional timbres and rhythms are woven into the palette in a way that grounds the mythic setting without turning the score into folklore museum music. Those touches give cultural color and make the film sound of a place, while contemporary electronic pulses and percussion keep it urgent and modern. One clever trick the composers use is motif shifting. The same melody appears in playful, defiant, or broken forms depending on who's playing it, so the score becomes a commentary on character rather than mere accompaniment. Silence and restraint get used like rare spices. When a huge revelation lands, the music sometimes pulls back entirely so the audience hears a single sob or the creak of a wooden floor, and that quiet amplifies the next musical hit. Conversely, swelling harmonies are timed to push images into catharsis rather than to manipulate them. The sound mix generally keeps the score smartly balanced with effects. The thunder of a storm or the snap of lightning blends with orchestral hits so action reads as a single sonic event, and voice performances never feel drowned. There are standout moments where music becomes the scene, a tender lullaby turned fugue during a sacrifice sequence, a mischievous motif that sneaks into an otherwise tense moment to remind you of Ne Zha's irrepressible spirit, and those passages linger because they're melodic and emotionally precise, not just loud. The result is a soundtrack that shapes tone, underlines irony, and supplies emotional shorthand. It can make a clash feel playful, a public shaming sound like a drumbeat of doom, and a private reconciliation bloom into something almost operatic, all while staying in service to characters and story rather than calling attention to itself. Ne Zha wears its ideas like armor and graffiti at the same time. Loud, a little cheeky, and stubbornly sincere, so the film's themes arrive as emotional punches rather than sermon slides. At the center is the tug-of-war between fate and free will. The spirit pearl and demon orb set up a cosmic prophecy, but the story keeps asking whether destiny is a script to obey or a back alley to sprint down and rewrite. Ne Zha's every reckless choice is both a tantrum and a claim on agency, which makes his defiance feel philosophical as well as entertaining. Identity and otherness run through the film like a recurring motif. Labels, monster, dragon, sun, behave like contagious rumors that infect whole communities, and the movie pleasures itself in showing how small cruelties and fear of difference coalesce into outright persecution. Parental love is complicated here. Protection can look like smothering, pride can pretend to be strength, and sacrifices are messy bargains that reveal how adult fears warp a child's self-image. Friendship and empathy provide the counterweight. The bond with Ao Bing reframes enemy lines as human relationships, suggesting that understanding rather than punishment dissolves the mythology of hate. Dualities, fire versus water/ice, public spectacle versus private grief, legend versus lived childhood, aren't just visual contrasts but moral questions about whether power makes you noble or whether nobility is about choice. The film also quietly skewers authority and mob logic. The heavenly court, rigid traditions, and a rumor-hungry town all push characters toward tragic options, which makes the eventual acts of sacrifice feel less like inevitable destiny and more like resistance against a social machine. Symbolism is economical. Recurring musical motifs, elemental imagery, and the split pearl keep popping up so ideas echo visually and emotionally rather than being spelled out. Tone-wise, the movie refuses to be dour. Humor, kinetic action, and enfant terrible energy let it tackle heavy themes without moralizing, and that tonal blend makes the messages land harder because they arrive disguised as entertainment. If there's a lingering question the film hands you, it's not what happened, but what will you do? Who writes your story? And can a single child, single friendship, or single act of defiance be enough to rewrite a myth? The visual effects in Ne Zha aren't just flashy decoration, they're the oxygen the movie breathes. Every frame looks like it was built to be both a painting and a playground, with CGI serving as the brush and the roller coaster track at the same time. The elemental powers are where the film flexes hardest. Ne Zha's fire isn't just orange flames slapped on a model, it's alive, textured, sparking like a wild animal that refuses to stay caged. Ao Bing's ice, by contrast, flows with crystalline precision, shards and scales catching light like glass, sharp yet strangely graceful. When those two forces clash, the effects don't feel like separate layers pasted onto the scene but part of the environment itself. The fire heating the air, the ice reshaping water and ground, so the battle feels physical and believable in its unreality. Large-scale sequences like the storm of heavenly lightning or the dragon transformations showcase a kind of controlled chaos. The VFX team understands spectacle isn't just about size but about rhythm. Bolts of energy rip through the frame in sync with character emotion, and transformations ripple with weight so you sense anatomy shifting under the magic rather than a skin being swapped. That tactile sense is what keeps the digital wizardry from ever feeling floaty. The integration of digital effects with character animation is seamless. You never feel that the action and emotion are fighting for attention, because the glowing sparks, swirling water, or collapsing structures all move in step with the character's intentions. When Ne Zha sulks in his room, even the embers of his fire flicker smaller, like sulking body language in visual form. That kind of detail makes the CGI part of the acting, not just the backdrop. Because this is a fully animated feature, there isn't a practical versus digital divide in the traditional sense, but the film still treats certain effects with a grounded, almost tactile weight. Environmental details, village streets, wooden beams, mist across the mountains, are rendered with subtle imperfections and textures, giving a sense of real-world grit that balances the glossy fantasy elements. This balance means the gods and monsters never feel like they're floating in a video game cutscene. They inhabit a world that has dust, rain, and cracks in the walls. The most striking aspect of the effects is how they serve mood as much as action. A birthday party becomes terrifying when illusions are shattered through blinding light and smoke. A sacrifice becomes operatic because fire and lightning literally carve the sky open. The CGI isn't showing off for its own sake, it's acting as a partner to story and emotion. Instead of distracting, it keeps the viewer anchored in awe, reminding you that this is not just an animated film but a myth made thunderously alive. Set design and locations in Ne Zha feel less like static backdrops and more like characters themselves, shaping the mood, tension, and mythic energy of every scene. The village where Ne Zha grows up is designed with a rustic, worn-in charm that makes it instantly believable. Crooked rooftops, crowded market stalls, weathered stone walls. It's not a picture-perfect fantasy town. It looks lived in, a place where gossip spreads faster than fire, which is exactly what the story needs when the villagers turn against Ne Zha. Those streets become claustrophobic when crowds gather, the framing compressing alleys and courtyards to make social pressure feel physically inescapable. The heavenly court, by contrast, is grand and symmetrical, drenched in golds and blues, built to radiate order and authority. Its massive scale and cold polish underline the weight of destiny and bureaucracy, a setting where decisions about human lives are made from a distance. Every pillar and sweeping staircase adds to the sense that mortals are tiny pieces in a cosmic game. When the story cuts between Ne Zha's cramped village and the heavenly halls, the design contrast visually reinforces the gap between a child's struggles and the machinery of fate. Natural locations carry just as much symbolic charge. The seaside where Ne Zha and Ao Bing share their first real friendship moment is open, fluid, bathed in light, a location that breathes freedom and possibility compared to the restrictive structures elsewhere. The mountains and misty landscapes often frame training sequences or moments of contemplation, giving a mythic scale to personal growth. The stormy skies that dominate the climax feel like a set piece built entirely of nature's fury, a stage big enough to hold gods and children wrestling over destiny. Props and smaller design elements deserve credit too. Ne Zha's weapons and charms, the magical seals, and even everyday objects like drums or lanterns are crafted with personality, never generic. They help ground the fantastical in a tactile reality, so when the story leaps into the supernatural, you still feel rooted in a recognizable world. The way these props are integrated, charms glowing during rituals, weapons clashing with elemental energy, keeps them from feeling ornamental. They are part of the action and emotion. The brilliance of the film's set design is that every location reflects theme as well as story. Confining spaces show how small-minded prejudice works, grand celestial palaces highlight the impersonal cruelty of destiny, and natural expanses remind us of choice, freedom, and friendship. The result is a world that is not only visually stunning but narratively alive, giving each scene a sense of place that deepens the myth without losing its human heartbeat. The dialogue in Ne Zha crackles with personality, swinging from razor-sharp wit to aching vulnerability without losing its rhythm. It never feels like characters are reading out mythological footnotes. Instead, they talk the way real people might if they just happened to wield fire or ice. Ne Zha's lines are especially alive, sarcastic, brash, and delightfully cheeky. He cracks jokes at the expense of authority, mocks anyone who underestimates him, and uses humor as both a shield and a weapon. That quick, irreverent banter makes him instantly engaging, but the script is clever enough to let the bravado break. When his guard finally drops, the shift in tone is striking because you can feel the raw pain under all the swagger. Those sudden plunges into sincerity make his outbursts of anger and despair hit harder than if he'd been somber all along. Ao Bing's dialogue is the opposite in tone, written with restraint and careful poise. His words often carry the weight of expectation, duty, and longing for approval. The subtle hesitations in his phrasing let you hear the cracks beneath the surface. When he does speak plainly, usually in moments of friendship or defiance, the impact is magnified precisely because his character doesn't waste words. The contrast between Ne Zha's fiery wit and Ao Bing's calm eloquence turns their exchanges into a constant tug-of-war of personality, making their friendship believable and deeply moving. Supporting characters are also given dialogue that fleshes them out beyond stereotypes. Ne Zha's parents speak with the language of love strained by fear. His father's stern commands are often wrapped in frustration, but the writing makes clear that the hardness is born from helplessness. His mother's softer words balance that severity, offering warmth that becomes even more poignant when the story pushes her son toward impossible choices. Tai, the bumbling yet wise mentor, gets some of the film's funniest lines, but the humor never feels detached from his role. Even his jokes reveal his eccentricity, his odd mix of wisdom and clumsiness that keeps him endearing. The script is full of sharp, quotable lines that define character arcs. Ne Zha's rebellious declarations about controlling his own fate ring out like rallying cries, not just for him but for the entire theme of the film. In contrast, Ao Bing's confessions about the weight of expectation linger as quiet heartbreaks. Even the antagonists get memorable phrasing, their bitterness dripping through lines that reveal envy and ambition without needing grand speeches. What makes the writing special is how it balances tones. One moment it's mischievous and playful, the next it's poetic and tragic, and the transition feels seamless. The humor never undercuts the gravity of the story. Instead, it keeps the film alive and unpredictable. The emotional lines, meanwhile, are simple rather than overstuffed, which makes them resonate all the more. The dialogue and script together create a voice for the film that is funny, defiant, and deeply human, wrapping myth in language that feels timeless and immediate all at once. Ne Zha plays in the sandbox of fantasy action, but it doesn't just tick the usual genre boxes. It smashes some of them, rebuilds others, and then sprinkles in enough heart and humor to make it feel completely fresh. The film has all the trappings you'd expect in a mythological action epic: dazzling battles, supernatural beings, prophecies, and high stakes involving the fate of entire realms. But instead of leaning into the predictable chosen one saves the world trope, it twists the story on its head. Ne Zha isn't the shining hero destined for greatness. He's the misunderstood outcast cursed at birth, feared by his own people, and left to wrestle with the idea that he might be doomed to become the villain. That subversion alone gives the genre new life, turning what could have been a straightforward hero's journey into something far more layered. The action sequences deliver exactly what fans of the genre crave: dynamic, high-energy clashes of elemental powers, but they are staged with a sense of creativity that sets them apart. Each fight isn't just about spectacle, it's tied to emotion. When Ne Zha clashes with Ao Bing, for example, it's not simply fire versus ice. It's anger colliding with sorrow, rebellion against duty, and friendship strained to the breaking point. That emotional undercurrent makes the battles more than genre-standard eye candy. At the same time, the choreography of movement, the swirling of mythic powers, and the sheer inventiveness of magical combat hit the sweet spot for anyone craving that blockbuster fantasy adrenaline rush. Yet for all its action, the film never forgets to balance tone. Humor runs through the story like lightning, giving the narrative spark and rhythm. Ne Zha's cheeky one-liners, Tai's bumbling antics, and even small moments of situational comedy keep the film from drowning in mythological heaviness. Where many fantasy epics lean into melodrama, this one constantly plays with levity, making the emotional beats even stronger when they hit. When the film shifts gears into tragedy or suspense, the impact is heightened because the audience has been laughing and breathing just moments before. Drama is also woven into the genre mix with surprising depth. The core of the film isn't just the clash of gods and demons. It's the intimate struggle of a child fighting against the role society has forced onto him. Themes of destiny, free will, family expectations, and friendship elevate the fantasy framework into something more profound. By giving the narrative such a strong emotional backbone, the film proves it isn't content to simply follow genre expectations. It wants to reshape them into something richer. What stands out most is how seamlessly the film blends its elements. Action doesn't overwhelm the story, humor doesn't undercut the tension, and drama doesn't stall the pacing. Each component is balanced like parts of a carefully composed symphony, making the experience feel complete rather than fragmented. Ne Zha thrives because it respects its genre enough to deliver the spectacle fans want, while also daring to reinvent its tropes with boldness and heart. It's fantasy action that's both familiar and exhilaratingly new, a genre execution that feels less like routine and more like reinvention. Ne Zha may be wrapped in the dazzling robes of myth and fantasy, but underneath the magic, fire, and thunder, there's a sharp pulse of social and cultural commentary that makes it more than just a visual spectacle. At its heart, the film is about identity, prejudice, and the crushing weight of societal judgment. Ne Zha is born with a curse, a label placed on him before he can even speak for himself. The villagers see him as a demon, a threat, a danger to everything they hold dear. That label follows him like a shadow, shaping how others treat him and how he sees himself. It's not just myth, it mirrors the real-world experience of people who are judged for how they look, where they come from, or the circumstances they were born into. The story taps into that universal struggle of trying to prove that you are more than what the world has decided you are. The film also digs into generational conflict and parental expectation. Ne Zha's parents love him, but their love is entangled with shame and fear. His father, in particular, carries the burden of wanting to protect his son while also being painfully aware of how society perceives him. This tension reflects broader cultural conversations about honor, reputation, and the sacrifices parents make in the hope of securing a better place for their children. In this way, Ne Zha becomes a lens through which the film comments on family dynamics that are deeply rooted in tradition but remain globally relatable. Cultural identity is another thread woven tightly into the film. Drawing from centuries-old mythology, Ne Zha revitalizes a classic Chinese tale for a modern audience, blending reverence for tradition with a rebellious twist. This balance between honoring the past and redefining it speaks volumes about how contemporary culture often struggles with the same challenge, respecting heritage while forging something new. The rebellious spirit of Ne Zha himself almost feels like a metaphor for a new generation unwilling to simply inherit the roles or reputations assigned by society. The commentary doesn't stop with individuals and families, it stretches into broader social structures. The villagers' fear of Ne Zha highlights how communities often unite not out of compassion but out of fear of the other. The mob mentality, the quickness to scapegoat, and the refusal to see nuance all feel strikingly relevant to today's social climate. Whether it's discussions around prejudice, intolerance, or societal fear of those who don't fit neatly into accepted boxes, the film quietly mirrors issues we wrestle with every day. What makes this commentary so effective is that it never feels like a lecture. The themes are embedded within the drama, action, and humor, not hammered into the audience with speeches. The film lets the viewer feel the weight of injustice and the triumph of defiance rather than telling them outright. This subtlety ensures that the social critique doesn't break the immersion of the fantasy world, but instead enriches it. Ne Zha becomes not only a character but a symbol, a reminder of how myths can reflect the deepest truths about human societies. Ne Zha is the kind of film that doesn't just entertain its audience, it hooks them, shakes them, and refuses to let go even after the credits roll. From the very first moments, the sheer energy of the story pulls you in. The humor comes fast and sharp, often disarming you with laugh-out-loud moments just before plunging you into scenes of genuine intensity. This balance keeps the audience on their toes, never quite sure whether to chuckle, gasp, or brace themselves for a fight scene that will leave them gripping the edge of their seat. But beyond the spectacle and humor, it's the emotional resonance that makes the film so deeply engaging. When Ne Zha struggles with his own sense of identity, the audience feels the sting of rejection with him. His anger, his loneliness, his fierce determination to prove he is more than a curse, these moments connect with anyone who has ever felt misunderstood or judged. You can almost feel the theater go quiet in those heavy scenes, as though everyone is holding their breath, waiting to see if Ne Zha can rise above what the world has placed on his shoulders. The action sequences create another layer of engagement, because they're not just flashy displays of power, they're emotional battles too. When Ne Zha clashes with Ao Bing, it isn't just a fight between two forces of nature, it's a collision of destiny, friendship, and the crushing weight of expectation. The stakes feel personal, and that makes every punch, every burst of fire or ice, land with more force. Audiences aren't just watching a fight, they're invested in the outcome, in what it means for the characters' souls, not just their survival. There are also moments designed to linger long after the film ends. The themes of fate versus choice, of carving your own path against what the world expects of you, invite deep reflection. Viewers leave the theater asking themselves where they see their own struggles in Ne Zha's story. That kind of resonance is what sparks discussion, what makes people recommend the film to friends, and what compels fans to revisit it again and again, not just for the dazzling visuals but for the emotional core that feels universal. And perhaps most importantly, Ne Zha knows how to create those unforgettable highs that make an audience feel like part of the ride. The collective gasps during epic reveals, the roaring laughter at Ne Zha's cheeky defiance, the quiet sniffles and the tender moments between him and his parents, all of these shared reactions bind the audience together. Watching this film doesn't feel like a passive experience. It feels like being swept into a whirlwind of emotions, where every twist and turn hits both the heart and the imagination with equal force. If you park Ne Zha next to other mythic animated epics, it both bows to familiar templates and cheekily retools them. It has the blockbuster action and elemental spectacle you'd expect from a fantasy adventure, yet refuses the born-to-be hero patter by making its protagonist an outcast whose rebellion is the point, not just a stepping stone. That twist gives it a different emotional engine compared with, say, the empathetic but doomed outsider beats of films like How to Train Your Dragon or the underdog humor of Kung Fu Panda, and it borrows the mythic intimacy of films such as Kubo or Spirited Away while keeping the pacing and punch of a modern CGI crowd-pleaser. Because it's the debut feature from Jiaozi and his Chengdu studio, Ne Zha wears both the marks of a fresh voice, a lean, energetic approach to tone and youth culture, and some rookie bravado, ambitious spectacle that sometimes overwhelms quieter moments, which makes it feel simultaneously like a breakthrough and a statement of intent for a new national animation industrialism. Compared with earlier Chinese hits, Monkey King, Hero is Back is the obvious predecessor in showing domestic appetite for mythic animation. Ne Zha pushed that moment further by blending transnational storytelling grammar with distinctly Chinese myth and youth sensibilities, which is why it landed so strongly with young audiences and helped reposition Chinese CG animation on the world map. Where many genre films stick to the same emotional gearbox, Ne Zha swaps gears constantly. One scene will be screwball and fast, the next operatic and tragic, so in terms of genre execution it both honors blockbuster expectations and plays with their emotional logic, offering something familiar enough to sit beside global animated hits but idiosyncratic enough to feel like a new voice from China's evolving animation scene. Ne Zha stacks meaning into images the way a magician hides cards up his sleeve. Simple objects and repeated visuals become shorthand for the film's biggest ideas, so you feel them even before a line is spoken. The clearest symbol is the split pearl itself. Two halves of a whole that set up the central binary of spirit and demon and keep echoing every time the movie shows twins, mirrors, or divided landscapes. That split becomes a visual question about whether identity is born or made. Elemental contrast, blazing reds and restless embers for Ne Zha, cool blues and crystalline forms for Ao Bing, does more than look good. It translates personality into palette, so every punch of color tells you who a character is feeling like in that moment. Circular motifs recur everywhere. Pearls, the windfire wheels, swirling storms, and even group shots where crowds form rings around a single condemned child. Circles in the film switch meaning between protection and entrapment depending on context. Architecture and scale are used as metaphorical commentary. Cramped alleys and low ceilings make social pressure tangible, while the heavenly court's monumentality and long stairways visualize bureaucratic coldness and the weight of destiny. Small props get oversized significance. A birthday cake becomes a stage for humiliation, a charm or seal stands in for cultural expectation, and Ne Zha's playful toys turned weapons blur the line between childhood and the burdens thrust on him. Repeated gestures, a hand reached and refused, a public pointing, the linking of hands in the final sacrifice, serve as visual punctuation about trust, community, and chosen bonds. When Ne Zha and Ao Bing clasp hands, it reads as a private treaty that subverts the cosmic scripts the world tried to write for them. Even crowd staging functions symbolically. Mobs are shot as walls closing in, individual faces lost to pattern, which turns the film's social commentary about scapegoating into an almost architectural horror. Weather and light are motifs too. Storms and lightning are not merely spectacle but the language of judgment and fate, while warm domestic light signals fragile safety. The film shifts its lighting as characters shift their choices, making moral change literal on the skin of the frame. Costume and texture matter. Dragon scales, soot-streaked clothing, and immaculate robes all mark roles people perform or are forced into, reminding you that identity here is often worn like armor or a mask. These visual metaphors multiply and refract. The same image will mean different things in different scenes, so the symbolism never feels lecturing. Instead, it surfaces organically from story and staging, letting the audience read emotional truth visually while the plot does the heavy lifting, which is why the film's deeper ideas land as moments you feel rather than arguments you're told. Ne Zha doesn't sit neatly inside a franchise the way a Hollywood tentpole might. It plays more like a thunderbolt that reignites an entire mythic landscape, a standalone blockbuster that suddenly makes studios, audiences, and creators look at old folktales and ask, what else can we pull out of this attic? Instead of being the first chapter of a rigid serial, the film behaves like a cultural reset. It takes a centuries-old story and gives it contemporary lungs, and that success opened the door for reimaginings, spin-offs, and other projects that borrow its energy rather than continue its plot beat for beat. In that sense, its franchise role is catalytic. It proves that domestic myth can carry modern CGI spectacle and youth tone at scale, which encourages producers to greenlight other myth-driven animations, alternate takes on Ne Zha himself, and broader transpositions of classic material into new settings. If you view the film as a piece of historical or cultural adaptation rather than a period drama, it's fascinating to track how faithfully and how freely it treats its sources. Iconic names, motifs, and moral conflicts remain, but they're repackaged with contemporary humor, punchy dialogue, and character psychology that speaks to modern anxieties about identity and agency. The result is a work that feels both rooted and inventive. It honors recognizable symbols from the legend while remixing tone, pacing, and even moral emphasis so the tale resonates with younger viewers and global audiences. In the wider historical context of animation, Ne Zha sits alongside films that revived national myth for a modern box office. Think of other successful mythic retellings that helped reconfigure public appetite for homegrown animation, and its impact is twofold. It raises domestic expectations for production quality and storytelling ambition, and it pushes international observers to take Chinese CG storytelling more seriously. Technically and narratively, it served as a proof of concept. Myth plus modern sensibility equals commercial and cultural traction. So whether you treat it as the opening salvo of a loose creative wave or as a modernized retelling of an old legend, its contribution is less about neat franchise bookkeeping and more about shifting the landscape, making ancient stories feel like they can be remixed, reissued, and reimagined without losing their moral core, and giving creators permission to be playful, abrasive, tender, and epic all at once. Made on a surprisingly modest budget of about $20 to $22 million, the film managed to deliver visuals and storytelling that felt like the work of a far more expensive production. The sheer scale of its execution, thousands of visual effects shots, multiple VFX vendors, and a large, dedicated animation team, helped create a cinematic experience that rivaled much higher-budget studio films. What makes its financial story even more impressive is how it transformed that relatively small investment into a record-breaking box office phenomenon. Domestically, it soared to billions of yuan in earnings, and worldwide it reached over $700 million, placing it among the most successful animated films ever produced outside Hollywood. When compared to its budget, the return was staggering. The film earned more than 30 times its production cost, a multiplier that most studios only dream about. Much of this success can be attributed to a combination of smart release strategies, premium IMAX showings, and aggressive domestic distribution that ensured the film dominated screens across major cities. Add to that the overwhelming word-of-mouth buzz, which spread like wildfire through online communities and social platforms, and the film didn't just perform well, it became a cultural event. Marketing also played its part, but not in the traditional sense of massive advertising campaigns. Instead, the film tapped into cultural resonance and audience pride, encouraging viewers to champion it themselves. Every ticket sold felt like more than just entertainment. It felt like participating in a shared celebration of creativity and storytelling. This blend of quality, relatability, and timing turned the movie into one of the greatest box office success stories in modern cinema, showing that even with a modest budget, a film can conquer the world if it connects deeply enough with its audience. The magic of this film truly begins on the biggest screen you can find. In theaters, every frame bursts to life with colors that seem to leap beyond the edges of the screen, and the sound design surrounds you so completely that it feels like you're standing inside the story rather than just watching it unfold. The scale of the action, the sweep of the landscapes, and the intensity of the battles all feel heightened when experienced with a crowd that gasps, laughs, and cheers alongside you. It's not just a viewing, it's a collective event, a shared energy that amplifies every emotion. For those who prefer the comfort of home, streaming offers a different kind of intimacy. You might lose the towering scale of an IMAX presentation, but you gain the ability to pause, rewind, and rewatch those jaw-dropping moments at your own pace. There's something satisfying about revisiting a particularly striking sequence, catching details you might have missed in theaters, or analyzing a hidden symbol woven into the background. If you're the kind of viewer who likes to pick apart the craft of filmmaking, streaming brings that opportunity right to your fingertips. Digital rentals also provide flexibility, giving audiences a chance to enjoy the film without the commitment of subscription services or a theater trip. Watching it on a high-definition screen with a solid sound system at home can still capture much of its impact, especially if you dim the lights and let yourself sink into the world without distraction. The story is rich enough, and the visuals powerful enough, to hold your attention even outside the immersive glow of the cinema. The best way to watch ultimately depends on what you value most. For sheer spectacle and the kind of once-in-a-lifetime experience that makes your heart race, nothing matches the theater. For reflection, analysis, or multiple revisits, streaming brings its own rewards. Either way, the film delivers, proving itself as a story strong enough to enchant no matter the screen size. If you enjoyed this video and would like us to provide reviews of every kind of movie, please remember to like, comment, share, and subscribe to our channel. Have a great day, and we'll see you in the next video. Goodbye.